Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Discovery. Nathaniel Fletcher's boots echoed against the hardwood floor as he approached his brother's house, the spare key cold in his palm. Devin had asked him to check on things while he and Marissa took their son camping for the weekend, but something felt wrong. The newspapers were piling up, and Devin hadn't returned his calls since Thursday. Nathaniel's military training kicked in as he noticed the front door was slightly ajar. 12 years in Special Forces had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming danger. He pushed the door open slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the concealed pistol at his waist. The house was too quiet. No television, no sounds of normal life. As he moved through the foyer, he called out softly, "Devin? Marissa?" Silence answered him. That's when he heard it, a soft whimpering from the living room. What he found that would haunt him forever. His 6-year-old nephew, Joey Fletcher, was tied to a dining chair with rope, his small face marked with bruises that made Nathaniel's blood boil. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, but they lit up with desperate hope when he saw his uncle. "Uncle Nate," Joey whispered urgently, glancing toward the kitchen as if afraid someone might hear. "Mom left me here. Dad's life is in danger. Please help." Nathaniel was beside the boy in an instant, his fingers working quickly to untie the ropes. His mind raced with questions, but first he needed to get Joey to safety. As he freed the boy's hands, Joey grabbed his uncle's shirt. "Uncle Nate, they're bad men. They took Mommy and Daddy to some place with white rooms. They said Daddy knows something he shouldn't." The boy's voice trembled. "They said they'd come back for me if Daddy doesn't do what they want." Just then, 3 sharp knocks echoed from the front door. Nathaniel's training took over. He scooped Joey into his arms and moved quickly toward the back of the house, his mind calculating escape routes. The knocking became more insistent, then stopped altogether. The sound of the front door creaking open made his blood run cold. "Check the living room," a gruff voice commanded. The kids should still be there. Nathaniel pressed himself against the wall near the back door, Joey clinging silently to his neck. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see 2 figures moving through the house, one tall and thin, the other built like a linebacker. Both wore dark clothing and moved with the confidence of men accustomed to violence. "The ropes are here, but no kid," the linebacker reported. "Damn it. Search the house. He can't have gone far." Nathaniel didn't wait to hear more. He slipped out the back door with Joey and moved quickly through Devin's backyard, using the fence line for cover. His truck was parked 2 blocks away. He'd approached on foot out of caution, a habit that had just saved their lives. As they reached his vehicle, Nathaniel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have your brother and his wife. The boy for their lives. Await further instructions." Nathaniel looked down at Joey, who was watching him with the kind of trust that only a child could have. The boy believed his uncle could fix this, could make everything right. Nathaniel intended to prove him correct, but not by negotiating with kidnappers. "Joey," he said gently, starting the truck, "I need you to tell me everything you remember about the men who took your parents. Everything they said, everything you saw." As they drove toward his secure apartment across town, Joey's story began to unfold. The pieces painted a picture that made Nathaniel's jaw clench with fury. His brother hadn't just stumbled into trouble. He'd been specifically targeted. And whoever was behind this had made a fatal mistake. They'd hurt a member of Nathaniel Fletcher's family. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. 3 hours later, Joey was sleeping peacefully in Nathaniel's guest bedroom, exhausted from the trauma, but safe behind reinforced walls and a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. Nathaniel sat at his computer, his contacts in military intelligence already working their magic. Devin Fletcher wasn't just Nathaniel's younger brother. He was one of the city's most respected forensic pathologists. For the past 5 years, he'd worked for the county medical examiner's office, handling cases that ranged from routine autopsies to high-profile investigations. But according to Joey, the men who took him had mentioned something about samples and keeping quiet. Nathaniel's phone rang. "Fletcher." "Nate, it's Marcus," came the familiar voice of his former commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Stone. I ran those background checks you requested. Your brother's been working on something that's caught some dangerous attention. Talk to me. 3 weeks ago, Devin flagged some irregularities in autopsy reports from St. Augustine Private Medical Center. Patients who died from supposedly natural causes, but their bodies showed signs of surgical procedures that weren't documented in their medical files. Nathaniel's grip tightened on the phone. Organ harvesting? That's what he suspected. He'd been quietly building a case, collecting evidence. But someone found out. Marcus paused. The medical center is owned by Walter Lindsay, a man with connections to some very unpleasant people. Military contractors who went private after some messy business overseas. The name Walter Lindsay triggered a memory that made Nathaniel's blood freeze. He'd encountered Lindsay 5 years ago during a black ops mission in Eastern Europe. Lindsay had been running a medical facility that was supposed to treat wounded civilians, but intelligence suggested it was being used for human experimentation. The mission had been scrubbed at the last minute due to political complications, leaving Lindsay to disappear into the shadows. Marcus, I need everything you have on Lindsay. Financial records, property holdings, known associates. Everything. Already on it. But Nate, this guy has resources and connections. He's not going to play by any rules. Neither am I. After ending the call, Nathaniel accessed his personal files, pulling up intelligence reports he'd kept from his military days. Lindsay's operation in Europe had been larger than anyone realized. A network of facilities using war refugees as test subjects for experimental medical procedures. When the operation was exposed, Lindsay had vanished with millions in funding and research data. Now he'd resurface in Nathaniel City, and Devin had stumbled onto his operation. Nathaniel's phone buzzed with another text. Sunrise Medical Warehouse, Dock 17, midnight. Come alone with the boy, or your brother and his wife die slowly. Instead of fear, Nathaniel felt the familiar calm that had carried him through dozens of combat missions. These people had made two critical errors. They'd threatened his family, and they'd assumed he would follow their rules. He pulled up building schematics for the warehouse district and began planning. By the time he was finished, Walter Lindsay would learn why Nathaniel Fletcher had earned the nickname the Reaper in 3 different war zones. But first, he needed to ensure Joey's safety. He made another call, this time to his wife, Stella. Nate? Thank God. I've been worried sick since your message. Stella, I need you to pick up Joey and take him to your sister's cabin upstate. Pack for a week, and don't tell anyone where you're going. What's happening? Someone hurt our family. I'm going to make sure it never happens again. Stella Fletcher had been married to a Special Forces operator long enough to understand that tone. How bad? Bad enough that I can't come with you. But I promise you this, by the time you come home, there won't be a threat left standing. After Stella collected Joey, Nathaniel spent the remaining hours until midnight preparing. He cleaned and checked his weapons, studied the warehouse layout, and made contact with 2 former teammates who happened to be in the area. Rex Bailey and Kurt Harvey had served with him in the most classified operations, and they owed him their lives several times over. As the clock struck 11:30 p.m., Nathaniel Fletcher disappeared into the night, carrying enough firepower to level a city block and a plan that would give Walter Lindsay nightmares for the rest of his very short life. Chapter 3. Into the Trap. The warehouse district at midnight was a maze of shadows and industrial decay. Nathaniel moved through the darkness like a ghost, his night vision goggles turning the world into green-tinted clarity. Dock 17 was exactly where he'd expected, a perfect kill zone with multiple escape routes for the enemy and nowhere to run for anyone stupid enough to walk into their trap. But Nathaniel Fletcher had never been stupid. Through his earpiece, Rex Bailey's voice crackled softly. Overwatch in position. I count 8 hostiles, armed with automatic weapons. Your brother and sister-in-law are in a white van parked behind the main warehouse. Confirmed, came Kurt Harvey's voice from the opposite flank. 2 more vehicles positioned as blocking forces. These guys are professional. Nathaniel smiled grimly. Then it's a fair fight. He'd positioned his team to turn the hunters into the hunted. While Lindsay's men waited for him to stumble into their ambush, they had no idea they were being watched by 3 of the most lethal soldiers America had ever produced. At exactly midnight, Nathaniel's phone rang. Mr. Fletcher came a cultured voice that he recognized as Walter Lindsay's. I trust you've brought the boy as instructed. I want to see my brother first. You're hardly in a position to make demands. But very well. Through his scope, Nathaniel watched as two men dragged Devin from a van. Even from a distance, he could see his brother had been beaten, but he was alive and alert. That was all Nathaniel needed to know. Now the boy, Lindsay commanded. He's safe somewhere you'll never find him, Nathaniel replied. Which is more than I can say for you. The line went silent for a moment. Mr. Fletcher, I believe you're misunderstanding the situation. You see, your brother discovered something that could be very damaging to my business interests. I offered him a generous sum to forget what he'd seen, but he proved disappointingly idealistic. What kind of business requires kidnapping and murder? Lindsay chuckled. The kind that provides experimental medical treatments to very wealthy clients who don't wish to wait for FDA approval. Your brother found evidence of my work and threatened to expose research that could save countless lives. You mean the organ harvesting operation you're running out of St. Augustine Medical Center? Another pause. I see you've been busy. Yes, we do occasionally require donor materials for our research, but the patients we select are already terminal. We simply ensure their deaths serve a greater purpose. Nathaniel felt his finger tighten on the trigger. Through his scope, he could see Lindsay now, a tall, thin man in an expensive suit, standing near the warehouse entrance like he owned the world. The greater purpose being your bank account. Spoken like a simple soldier. You couldn't possibly understand the complexity of advancing medical science. But this conversation has grown tiresome. You have 10 minutes to deliver the boy, or I'll demonstrate some of my more creative research techniques on your brother's wife. The line went dead. Nathaniel spoke into his earpiece. Target acquired. Execute on my mark. What happened next lasted exactly 97 seconds and would later be described by police investigators as a surgical strike of unprecedented precision. Rex Bailey's first shot dropped the sniper on the warehouse roof. Kurt Harvey's simultaneous strike eliminated the team guarding the perimeter. Nathaniel moved like a force of nature, flowing through the shadows and eliminating threats with the efficiency of a machine designed for killing. By the time Walter Lindsay realized his ambush had become his execution, 6 of his men were down, and Nathaniel Fletcher was standing behind him with a pistol pressed to his skull. Dr. Walter Lindsay, Nathaniel said calmly, you're under citizen's arrest for kidnapping, murder, and crimes against humanity. You can't prove anything, Lindsay snarled. I don't have to. You just confessed everything over an open phone line that was being recorded by federal agents. Nathaniel smiled. Did you really think I'd come here without backup? As if on cue, the warehouse flooded with light as FBI vehicles surrounded the building. Agent Julie Madden, whom Nathaniel had contacted hours earlier, emerged with a tactical team. But Nathaniel wasn't finished with Walter Lindsay. As the FBI moved in to secure the scene, he leaned close to Lindsay's ear. This is just the beginning, he whispered. By morning, every one of your facilities will be raided. Every one of your associates will be in custody, and every victim's family will know exactly who you are. You wanted to play God with people's lives? Now you get to face judgment. As Lindsay was led away in handcuffs, Nathaniel rushed to free his brother and Marissa. Devin embraced him with tears in his eyes. How did you know? Devin asked. Because you're my brother, Nathaniel replied. And nobody hurts my family and walks away. But as they watched the FBI loading evidence from the warehouse, Nathaniel's military instincts told him this victory was too easy. Men like Walter Lindsay didn't build criminal empires without contingency plans. And somewhere in the darkness, other players in this deadly game were already moving their pieces. The war was far from over. Chapter 4. The Network Unravels. 3 days after the warehouse confrontation, Nathaniel sat in FBI agent Julie Madden's office, reviewing evidence that painted a picture far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Walter Lindsay's operation wasn't just local. It was part of an international network trafficking organs and conducting illegal medical experiments on vulnerable populations. We found records of 17 facilities across 12 states. Agent Madden explained, sliding photographs across the desk. Conservative estimates suggest over 200 victims in the past 5 years. Nathaniel studied the images: abandoned warehouses converted into makeshift operating theaters, luxury medical facilities that catered to wealthy clients seeking experimental treatments, and shipping manifests that detailed the transportation of biological materials across international borders. What about Lindsay? Is he talking? Lawyered up immediately. But we don't need his cooperation. The evidence your brother collected is enough to put him away for life. She paused. There's something else. The phone you used to record Lindsay's confession? It was being monitored by someone else during your conversation. Meaning his partners know their operation has been compromised. We've already detected unusual activity at 3 other facilities. Bank accounts being emptied, equipment being moved. Agent Madden leaned forward. They're shutting down and relocating. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. How long before they disappear completely? 48 hours, maybe less. That afternoon, Nathaniel returned to his brother's house to help clean up the mess left by the kidnappers. Devin was back at work, determined to help the FBI identify more victims, while Marissa had taken Joey to stay with her parents until the trauma subsided. As they worked, Devin shared more details about his investigation. It started with a routine autopsy, a homeless man who supposedly died from a heart attack. But when I opened him up, I found surgical scars that weren't in any medical records. Someone had removed a kidney and part of his liver, then closed him up and dumped him on the street to die. How many others? At least 30 cases in the past year. All homeless, all undocumented immigrants, all people nobody would miss. Devin's voice was heavy with anger. They were using my office to legitimize their murders, filing false death certificates to cover their tracks. Nathaniel's phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Stone's number. Tell me you have good news, Marcus. Mixed bag. We identified Lindsay's main partner, a man named Glenn Ballard, former military doctor who was discharged for conducting unauthorized experiments on soldiers. He's been funding the operation through a network of shell companies. Where is he now? That's the bad news. Ballard cleared out of his primary facility in Nevada yesterday, but intelligence suggests he's planning something big before he disappears. Define big. We intercepted communications suggesting he's attempting to recover something from one of the shut-down facilities. Something valuable enough to risk exposure. Nathaniel felt ice form in his stomach. Marcus, where's the nearest facility to my location? About 40 miles north. An abandoned pharmaceutical plant they've been using as a research center. A pause. Nate, there's something else. Satellite imagery shows unusual heat signatures in that building. Lots of them. The implication hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. He's got more victims there. That's what we think. Local authorities are overwhelmed. They're asking for federal assistance, but the earliest a tactical team can arrive is tomorrow morning. That's too long. Nate, don't even think about it. This isn't like the warehouse. Ballard's got military training and resources. If he's making a last stand, he'll be ready for a fight. After ending the call, Nathaniel stared at the wall, his mind racing. Every minute they waited meant more innocent people could die. But Marcus was right. Charging it alone would be suicide, unless he didn't go alone. He made 2 phone calls. Rex Bailey and Kurt Harvey were both available and eager for another round with Lindsay's organization. They've been tracking the network's movements through their own contacts and had reached the same conclusion. Ballard was planning something that would result in massive casualties. What's the play? Rex asked when they met at Nathaniel's apartment 2 hours later. Reconnaissance first. We need to know how many hostiles, how many hostages, and what kind of defenses we're facing. Nathaniel spread blueprints of the pharmaceutical plant across his dining table. The building has 3 main entrances and a freight elevator that connects to an underground parking garage. Kurt studied the plans. If Ballard's smart, he'll have the hostages separated from his escape route, probably in the basement levels where they can't be easily extracted. Then we go in quiet, locate the hostages, and call for backup once we know what we're dealing with. Rex shook his head. You know, it won't stay quiet. Men like Ballard don't surrender. This is going to end in blood. Nathaniel looked at his 2 oldest friends. men who had followed him into hell more times than any of them could count. I know, but there are innocent people in that building, and Glenn Ballard has already proven he's willing to kill them rather than let them go free. We're the only things standing between those hostages and whatever exit strategy he's planning. As they loaded their equipment and prepared for what could be their final mission together, Nathaniel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your brother should have minded his own business. Now everyone pays for his curiosity. The message was followed by a photo that made Nathaniel's blood run cold. A room filled with hospital beds, each occupied by a terrified person strapped down with medical restraints. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was a timer counting down from 18 hours, 42 minutes, and 33 seconds. Glenn Ballard wasn't planning to escape. He was planning to destroy all the evidence, including every witness who could testify against him. And he'd just given them less than 19 hours to stop him. Chapter 5. The Devil's Laboratory. The abandoned pharmaceutical plant loomed against the night sky like a monument to corporate decay. Nathaniel and his team approached from the east, using a drainage canal to avoid the motion sensors they'd identified during their afternoon reconnaissance. Through night vision, the building revealed its secrets. Armed guards patrolling in pairs, vehicles positioned for rapid escape, and enough firepower to hold off a small army. I count 12 hostiles on the perimeter, Rex whispered through their encrypted comm system. 3 more vehicles in the underground garage. Thermal imaging shows approximately 30 people in the basement level, Kurt added. Most appear to be restrained. Nathaniel studied the building through his scope. Glenn Ballard had turned the old pharmaceutical plant into a fortress, but every fortress had weaknesses. The key was finding them before the timer in that photograph reached 0. They'd been watching for 3 hours, mapping guard rotations and identifying entry points. The building's layout worked in their favor. Multiple levels connected by maintenance corridors that weren't being actively monitored. But getting to the basement undetected would require precision, timing, and a level of violence that would alert everyone in the building. New plan, Nathaniel decided. We don't go in quiet. We go in loud and draw all the attention to the upper levels while one of us gets to the hostages. That's suicide, Rex protested. We'd be outnumbered 4-1. Not if we do it right. Nathaniel pointed to the building's main electrical systems. Kurt, you take out their power at exactly 0200 hours. Rex, you create a distraction at the main entrance. Make them think we're coming in force from the front. I'll use the chaos to reach the basement. And if Ballard decides to cut his losses and kill the hostages, he won't. He needs them alive for leverage. Nathaniel hoped he was right. Besides, I've got something he wants more than witnesses. He pulled out an encrypted drive he'd taken from Walter Lindsay's office. This contains the complete financial records of their network. Bank accounts, client lists, payment schedules, everything. As long as I have this, Glenn Ballard can't disappear completely. At exactly 2 a.m., the pharmaceutical plant went dark. Chaos erupted immediately. Emergency lighting flickered on as guards shouted orders and vehicle engines roared to life. Rex Bailey announced his presence by putting a .50 caliber round through the building's main entrance, then followed it with a sustained assault that convinced everyone inside they were under attack by a major force. Nathaniel moved like a shadow through the maintenance corridors, his route memorized from hours of studying blueprints. The building's emergency systems worked in his favor. Locked doors defaulted to open positions, and the backup generators were focused on maintaining power to essential systems rather than security measures. He reached the basement level just as Glenn Ballard's voice echoed through the building's intercom system. Mr. Fletcher, I know you're here. Your friend's demonstration upstairs was impressive, but ultimately pointless. You have exactly 10 minutes to reach my office on the 3rd floor, or I begin eliminating hostages. Nathaniel found himself in a nightmare laboratory that made Walter Lindsay's operation look humanitarian by comparison. The basement had been converted into a medical facility where human beings were being used as test subjects for experimental procedures. Rows of hospital beds contained victims in various stages of surgical trauma, their bodies bearing the marks of organ harvesting and tissue experimentation. But they were alive. Moving quickly from bed to bed, Nathaniel began releasing restraints and checking vital signs. Most of the victims were heavily sedated, but conscious enough to understand they were being rescued. A young woman grabbed his arm as he freed her. The others, she whispered weakly. There are more in the sub-basement. Children. Nathaniel's vision went red. Through his earpiece, Rex's voice crackled. Nate, they're mobilizing everything they've got. I can keep them busy for maybe 5 more minutes. Keep them occupied. I need more time. He found the stairs to the sub-basement and descended into a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Glenn Ballard hadn't just been harvesting organs from adults. He'd been conducting experimental procedures on children, testing new techniques for organ transplantation and regenerative medicine. 12 children, ranging in age from 8 to 16, lay unconscious in a sterile medical ward. All showed signs of recent surgery, and all were connected to machines that monitored their vital signs with the cold precision of a production facility. Nathaniel began systematically disconnecting medical equipment and gathering the children who were strong enough to move. The younger ones would need to be carried, which meant multiple trips, or... His comm system crackled with Glenn Ballard's voice. Time's up, Fletcher. I'm coming down to handle this personally. Through the sub-basement security cameras, Nathaniel watched as Ballard descended with 4 armed men, all carrying automatic weapons and moving with military precision. They'd be at his location in less than 2 minutes. He made a choice that would define everything that followed. Instead of trying to evacuate the children, he positioned himself between them and the only entrance to the sub-basement. If Glenn Ballard wanted to harm these kids, he'd have to go through their protector first. And Nathaniel Fletcher was done running from monsters. Chapter 6. Sins of the Father. Glenn Ballard entered the sub-basement with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the advantages. Tall and lean with the bearing of a career military officer, he wore surgical scrubs splattered with blood and carried a pistol with the casual ease of someone accustomed to violence. Mr. Fletcher, he said conversationally, you've caused considerable inconvenience to my operation. Nathaniel stood in front of the hospital beds, his rifle trained on the entrance. Behind him, 12 children lay unconscious, their lives hanging in the balance. Let them go, Ballard. Your fight is with me. My fight is with anyone who threatens my work. Ballard gestured to his armed companions, who spread out to cover the room's exits. Do you have any idea what we've accomplished here? These children represent breakthrough advances in regenerative medicine. Their sacrifice will save thousands of lives. Their murder, you mean? Such a limited perspective. Ballard moved closer, seemingly unconcerned by Nathaniel's weapon. Tell me, Mr. Fletcher, how many people have you killed in service to your country? How many lives have you sacrificed for the greater good? I've never murdered children. Haven't you? What about the family in Kandahar, whose home you destroyed pursuing a terrorist cell? What about the civilians killed in that drone strike you called an outside Mosul? Ballard smiled coldly. I've read your file. You've spilled plenty of innocent blood. Nathaniel felt the familiar weight of guilt that had haunted him since leaving the military, but he pushed it aside. Those were different. We were fighting a war, and so am I. A war against disease, against genetic defects, against the random cruelties of human biology. Ballard reached one of the hospital beds and placed his hand on a young girl's forehead. This child was born with a rare heart condition. In 6 months, she would have died in agony. Instead, I've given her a new heart, new hope. You cut out of someone else, from a terminal patient who would have died anyway. I simply ensured his death served a purpose. Through his earpiece, Nathaniel heard Rex's voice. Nate, I'm running low on ammunition and they're closing in. Whatever you're doing down there, you need to finish it. There's something else you should know, Ballard continued. Your brother's investigation didn't just threaten my operation. It put these children in danger. We were planning to continue their treatment at a more secure facility, but his interference forced us to accelerate our timeline. You're lying. Am I? Every one of these children was dying before we found them. Street kids, runaways, children whose families couldn't afford proper medical care. We offered them a chance at life, and in return, they're contributing to research that will help countless others. Nathaniel studied the children's faces, looking for signs of the procedures Ballard described. What he saw instead were surgical scars that told a different story. Evidence of organ harvesting, tissue extraction, and experimental procedures that had nothing to do with treating their conditions. You're not saving them, Nathaniel realized. You're using them for spare parts. Ballard's mask of civilized discourse finally slipped. You, simple-minded fool. These children were already lost, runaways, homeless, forgotten by society. At least this way, their lives have meaning. Their lives had meaning before you got your hands on them. Sentimental nonsense. Ballard raised his pistol. Now, you can put down your weapon and surrender that data drive, or I'll demonstrate some of my more advanced surgical techniques on these children while they're still conscious. Nathaniel's finger tightened on his trigger, but 4 automatic weapons were trained on him from different angles. Even if he killed Ballard, his men would cut down both Nathaniel and the children. Then inspiration struck. You know what I think, Ballard? I think you're scared. Nathaniel's voice carried through the sub-basement with deadly calm. I think you know your research is worthless. Your procedures are failures, and your so-called medical advances are nothing more than butchery dressed up in academic language. You know nothing about my work. I know you've been selling organs to wealthy clients who don't want to wait for legitimate transplants. I know you've been conducting illegal experiments on vulnerable populations because real medical institutions won't let you anywhere near their patients. Nathaniel took a step forward. And I know you're a coward who preys on children because they can't fight back. Ballard's face flushed with rage. You want to see my work? Let me show you exactly what I've accomplished. He moved toward one of the sleeping children, producing a scalpel from his surgical kit. This boy has a perfectly healthy liver that could save the life of a prominent senator's daughter. His death will serve a greater purpose than his miserable existence ever could. That was when Nathaniel acted. The flashbang grenade he'd been concealing behind his back filled the sub-basement with blinding light and deafening noise. In the chaos that followed, Nathaniel's years of combat training took over. He moved through the confusion like an avenging angel, eliminating Ballard's men with surgical precision while they stumbled blindly through the aftermath of the explosion. When the smoke cleared, Glenn Ballard found himself alone with Nathaniel Fletcher, his weapon torn from his hands and his men scattered across the floor in various stages of unconsciousness. It's over, Nathaniel said simply. You think this ends anything? Ballard snarled. There are others. Clients who need our services, researchers who will continue our work. You've stopped one facility, but the network will rebuild. Not if there's nothing left to rebuild. Through the building's security system, Nathaniel triggered the emergency protocols that would flood the facility with federal agents. But more importantly, he activated the data upload that would transmit every file from Ballard's computers to law enforcement agencies around the world. As sirens wailed in the distance and tactical teams surrounded the building, Glenn Ballard realized the full scope of his defeat. Not only had his operation been destroyed, but every client, every partner, every facility in his network was about to be exposed. You have no idea what you've done, he whispered. I've stopped a monster, Nathaniel replied, and ensured that every one of your victims gets justice. But even as federal agents flooded the sub-basement and medical teams began treating the rescued children, Nathaniel knew their ordeal was far from over. Men like Ballard didn't build criminal empires alone, and somewhere in the shadows, other predators were already planning their revenge. The war was entering a new phase. Chapter 7, The Final Gambit. 2 weeks after Glenn Ballard's capture, Nathaniel Fletcher stood in his brother's kitchen, reading a newspaper headline that should have brought him satisfaction. International organ trafficking ring dismantled, 200 arrests worldwide. Instead, he felt only unease. The FBI raids had been devastatingly effective. Walter Lindsay's network had crumbled within days as law enforcement agencies across 12 countries moved simultaneously to arrest conspirators and rescue victims. But intelligence suggested that the organization's leadership had anticipated such losses and prepared accordingly. Agent Julie Madden arrived with news that confirmed his worst fears. We've lost contact with 3 key witnesses, she reported. All families who were supposed to testify against Lindsay and Ballard. Their safe houses were compromised last night. Inside job. Has to be. The locations were classified beyond the highest levels. She slid a file across the table. There's more. Financial analysis suggests the network moved approximately $50 million to offshore accounts just hours before a raid began. Someone gave them advance warning. Nathaniel studied the file, his military mind automatically calculating resources and threat assessments. $50 million could buy a lot of loyalty, weapons, and time. Who had access to the raid schedules? 17 people across multiple agencies. We're investigating all of them, but she gestured helplessly. These people have connections we're still discovering. The conversation was interrupted by Nathaniel's secure phone. The caller ID showed a number he recognized but hadn't expected. His former commanding officer, General Patricia Hayes. Fletcher, we need to meet. Now. General, I'm retired. This isn't a request, soldier. St. Anthony's Church, downtown. 1 hour. The line went dead. St. Anthony's Church was nearly empty when Nathaniel arrived, its Gothic architecture casting long shadows in the afternoon light. General Hayes sat alone in a pew near the altar, her uniform bearing stars that represented 40 years of distinguished service. Sit, she commanded without turning around. Nathaniel complied, noting how his former commander seemed to have aged years in the months since he'd last seen her. General, what's this about? It's about you kicking over a hornet's nest and not understanding the consequences. She finally looked at him, her eyes carrying a weight that spoke of classified burdens. The network you destroyed wasn't just trafficking organs, Fletcher. They were part of a larger operation that has implications for national security. Meaning some of their clients were very important people. Politicians, military officers, intelligence operatives, individuals whose survival was considered vital to ongoing operations. She pulled out a tablet and showed him a list of names. 3 senators, 2 federal judges, 1 cabinet member, and 4 senior military officials. All received treatments from Ballard's organization. Nathaniel felt ice form in his stomach as he recognized several names. They were blackmailing them. Worse, they were keeping them alive to maintain influence and control. Some of these people were supposed to die from their conditions, but Ballard's procedures gave them years of additional life in exchange for cooperation. So now that the network is gone, now they're desperate, and desperate, powerful people make very dangerous enemies. General Hayes stood up. You've been marked for elimination, Fletcher. Not just you, your entire family. They can't risk any loose ends that might expose their involvement. How long do I have? Professional contractors are already in the city. My sources suggest they'll move within 24 hours. She handed him a secure phone. I'm offering you extraction. New identities for you and your family. Relocation to a secure facility until this blows over. Nathaniel studied the phone. Running would keep his family safe, but it would also mean abandoning all the victims who still needed justice. What about the children we rescued? The other survivors? Not your responsibility anymore. The hell they're not. General Hayes sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. Nathaniel, these people have resources you can't imagine. Military-grade equipment, access to classified intelligence, connections that reach into every level of government. You cannot fight them and win. Maybe not. But I can make them pay a price they're not willing to accept. Ow! Nathaniel smiled grimly. By doing what I do best, turning their strengths into weaknesses. That evening, Nathaniel gathered his family at his secure apartment. Stella, Devin, Marissa, and young Joey sat around the dining table, their faces reflecting the strain of the past weeks. He'd already arranged for Rex Bailey and Kurt Harvey to provide additional security, but what he was about to propose would put them all at risk. They're coming for us, he said without preamble. All of us. And running won't solve the problem. It will just delay it. What are you suggesting? Stella asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. We end this. Tonight. Permanently. He spread out building plans, satellite photos, and intelligence reports that painted a picture of their enemies' resources and locations. The contractors hunting them were operating from a luxury hotel downtown, using it as a base for their surveillance and planning operations. 16 professional killers, backed by unlimited resources and government connections, Nathaniel continued. Normally, those would be impossible odds. And now, Devin asked, now they have a weakness they don't know about. He pulled out the secure phone General Hayes had given him. This device doesn't just provide extraction. It contains access codes to military satellite networks. With the right modifications, I can turn their own surveillance systems against them. That's treason, Marissa whispered. No, Nathaniel corrected. That's justice. As his family digested the implications of what he was proposing, young Joey spoke up from where he'd been listening quietly. Uncle Nate, are you going to stop the bad men who hurt those kids? Nathaniel knelt down to meet his nephew's eyes. Yes, Joey. I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. Good, the boy said simply. Because heroes don't run away from monsters. Out of the mouths of babes. By midnight, Nathaniel Fletcher was once again preparing for war. But this time, he wasn't just fighting for his family. He was fighting for every victim of Walter Lindsay and Glenn Ballard's network, and for a justice system that had failed them all. The contractors hunting him had made one fatal error. They'd assumed their prey would run. Instead, they were about to discover why Nathaniel Fletcher had never lost a battle when everything he cared about was on the line. Chapter 8, Wolves at the Gate. The Meridian Hotel stood 43 stories above the city, its penthouse suites offering commanding views and tactical advantages that made it perfect for a team of professional killers to coordinate their operations. But height also meant limited escape routes, and Nathaniel Fletcher intended to use that against them. At 2 a.m., the hotel's security cameras began experiencing technical difficulties. What appeared to be random malfunctions were actually the result of Nathaniel's modifications to General Hayes' satellite access device. One by one, the building's electronic eyes went dark, creating blind spots that moved through the structure like a creeping shadow. 16 floors below the penthouse, Nathaniel emerged from the hotel service elevator wearing maintenance coveralls and carrying a toolbox filled with items that had nothing to do with building repair. His military training had taught him that the best way to infiltrate a secure position was to become invisible, and nobody paid attention to maintenance workers during the night shift. The contractors had taken over the entire 40th floor, converting luxury suites into a command center that would have impressed most military planners. Through the modified security feeds he'd hacked, Nathaniel could see their setup. Electronic surveillance equipment, weapons caches, tactical gear, and enough firepower to level a city block. But what caught his attention was the operational board they'd set up in the main suite. Photos of his family members were arranged alongside detailed intelligence profiles, surveillance photos, and what appeared to be killing schedules. Stella and Joey were marked for elimination at 0600 hours. Devin and Marissa at 0800. Nathaniel himself was scheduled to die last, after watching everyone he loved murdered before his eyes. The sight of his 6-year-old nephew's photo marked with a red X nearly sent Nathaniel into a killing rage that would have compromised everything. Instead, he channeled that fury into the cold precision that had made him one of the most effective soldiers in Special Forces history. Moving through the hotel's maintenance corridors, he planted his first surprise in the building's central air conditioning system. The device looked like a standard filtration unit, but contained enough aerosolized tranquilizer to incapacitate everyone on the 40th floor within 10 minutes of activation. His second stop was the building's main electrical system. A few minor modifications would allow him to control power distribution to any floor, effectively trapping his enemies in an elevator shaft or stairwell of his choosing. The third device went into the building's fire suppression system. When activated, it would flood the 40th floor with a specialized foam that would obscure vision while providing perfect cover for a single operator moving through familiar territory. But Nathaniel's real masterpiece was psychological. Using the hotel's internal communication system, he began broadcasting a message to every room on the 40th floor. This is Nathaniel Fletcher. You have exactly 1 hour to evacuate this building and leave the city permanently. Anyone still here after 300 hours will be considered a hostile combatant. The response was immediate and predictable. The contractors began mobilizing for combat, assuming their target was attempting to intimidate them into retreat. What they didn't realize was that Nathaniel was using their tactical radios to monitor their communications and track their movements in real time. "Target is in the building," reported the team leader, a man Nathaniel recognized as Clifford Hyde, a former Delta Force operator who'd gone private after a dishonorable discharge. "All teams, execute lockdown protocol. Nobody gets in or out." "Copy that," came multiple responses as 16 professional killers prepared to hunt one man through 43 floors of luxury hotel. It was exactly what Nathaniel wanted them to do. At 0245 hours, he activated the first phase of his plan. The building's air conditioning system began circulating his chemical surprise, while strategic power outages created confusion and forced the contractors to rely on battery-powered equipment with limited lifespans. The fire suppression system activated at 0250, flooding the 40th floor with thick foam that reduced visibility to less than 3 feet. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through the artificial fog as 16 killers found themselves trapped in a maze where their numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. Nathaniel moved through the chaos like a ghost, his night vision goggles and familiarity with the building layout giving him decisive advantages. He eliminated the first 2 contractors without them ever seeing him coming, their own weapons adding to his arsenal. "Fletcher," Clifford Hyde's voice echoed through the floor's communication system. "We know you're here. Come out and face us like a soldier." Nathaniel responded by cutting the main power lines, plunging the entire floor into darkness. In the absolute black that followed, he became something from the contractor's worst nightmares, an invisible predator stalking through territory they could no longer navigate. The psychological effect was devastating. Professional killers who had operated in war zones around the world found themselves reduced to frightened children, firing at shadows and accidentally shooting each other in the confusion. By 0315, 8 of the 16 contractors were down. The remainder had barricaded themselves in the penthouse suite, using their electronic equipment to try to restore some measure of control over their environment. "This is impossible," one of them whispered into his radio. "It's just one man who knows exactly what he's doing," Hyde replied grimly, "and who's fighting for something more important than money." That was when Nathaniel's voice came through their communication system, calm and deadly. "Clifford Hyde, you and I serve in some of the same places. You know what I'm capable of when someone threatens my family." "Fletcher, let's discuss terms. We're all professionals here. The only terms are unconditional surrender. Put down your weapons and walk away, and you live to see tomorrow." "You know I can't do that." "Then you know how this ends." What followed was the most brutal 15 minutes of close-quarters combat Nathaniel had ever experienced. Hyde and his remaining men were professionals who fought with the desperation of cornered animals. But they were fighting in an environment Nathaniel had turned into his personal killing ground, against an opponent who had every advantage except numbers. When the smoke cleared, Clifford Hyde lay dying in the penthouse suite, his expensive tactical gear no match for superior planning and righteous fury. "Why?" he gasped as Nathaniel knelt beside him. "Because some things are worth dying for," Nathaniel replied, "and some things are worth killing for." As dawn broke over the city, Nathaniel Fletcher walked out of the Meridian Hotel and into a new world. The network that had threatened his family was destroyed, its leadership dead or in prison, and its surviving members scattered to the winds. But more importantly, the children Glenn Ballard had victimized would grow up knowing that someone had cared enough to fight for them. The families torn apart by Walter Lindsay's operation would find justice, and no one would ever again mistake Nathaniel Fletcher for an easy target. The war was over. Evil had been defeated, and for the first time in weeks, Nathaniel Fletcher could go home to his family with the knowledge that they were truly safe. Chapter 9. New Dawn. 6 months after the destruction of the organ trafficking network, Nathaniel Fletcher stood in a federal courthouse watching Walter Lindsay receive his sentencing. The judge's words carried the weight of absolute justice. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for each count of murder, to be served consecutively. Additionally, the court orders the forfeiture of all assets associated with your criminal enterprise, with proceeds to be distributed among victim compensation funds. Lindsay showed no emotion as he was led away in shackles, but Nathaniel saw something break in the man's eyes, the final realization that his empire of suffering had crumbled completely. Glenn Ballard had been sentenced 2 weeks earlier. His military training proved useless against the mountain of evidence Devin had compiled and the testimony of surviving victims. The judge in that case had been particularly harsh. You perverted your medical training and betrayed your oath to help others. You will spend the rest of your natural life in solitary confinement, with no possibility of parole. But the real victory wasn't in the courtrooms. It was in the rehabilitation centers where the rescued children were slowly healing from their trauma. Nathaniel visited them regularly, bringing gifts and offering the steady presence of someone who understood what it meant to survive hell. Joey Fletcher had recovered from his ordeal with the resilience that only children possessed. The boy who had whispered desperately for help was now a confident first grader who told anyone who would listen that his Uncle Nate was a real-life superhero. "Did you really fight all those bad guys by yourself?" Joey asked during one of their weekly fishing trips. "I had help," Nathaniel replied, baiting the boy's hook. "Your dad provided the evidence that made it possible to catch them. And sometimes the best way to fight bad guys is to be smarter than they are. Are there more bad guys out there?" Nathaniel considered the question carefully. "There are always people who try to hurt others, Joey. But there are also good people who stop them. The important thing is to always stand up for what's right, even when it's scary." The boy nodded solemnly, then brightened as he felt a tug on his fishing line. "I got one." As Joey reeled in his catch with excited chatter, Nathaniel reflected on how much their lives had changed. Devin had been promoted to chief medical examiner, with expanded authority to investigate suspicious deaths. Marissa had started a non-profit organization to help families of trafficking victims. Stella had written a book about their experience, with all proceeds going to support survivor services. And Nathaniel himself had found a new purpose. "Mr. Fletcher?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Agent Julie Madden approaching along the lakeshore. "Julie, I thought you were back in Washington." "I am, but I want to talk to you about an opportunity." She sat down beside him on the dock, watching Joey's enthusiastic fishing technique. "The Bureau is creating a new task force to combat human trafficking networks. We need someone with your particular skills and experience." "I'm retired. Are you?" "Because my sources tell me you've been consulting with law enforcement agencies in 3 states, helping them identify and dismantle trafficking operations." Nathaniel smiled. She was right, of course. In the months since destroying Lindsay's network, he'd been contacted by police departments, federal agencies, and international organizations dealing with similar crimes. His expertise in both military tactics and criminal psychology made him uniquely qualified to predict how trafficking networks operated and defend themselves. "The position would be entirely voluntary," Julie continued. "Consulting basis only, working cases that require your specific skill set. You'd help coordinate operations, train other agents, and provide tactical support when needed." "What makes you think I'm interested?" "Because 6 months ago, you walked into hell to save a group of children you'd never met. Because you turned down a book deal that would have made you millions in order to focus on helping survivors. And because every trafficking victim we've interviewed specifically asks about the man who saved us and whether he's still fighting for people like them." Before Nathaniel could respond, Joey came running over with his fish, proudly displaying the small bass he'd caught. "Uncle Nate, look what I got. That's a beauty, Joey. Your mom's going to be impressed." As they packed up their fishing gear and prepared to head home, Julie Madden handed Nathaniel a business card. "Think about it. The offer stands whenever you're ready." That evening, the Fletcher family gathered for their weekly dinner at Devin and Marissa's house. It had become a tradition since the ordeal, a way to stay connected and celebrate the fact that they were all still alive and together. "So what did Agent Madden want?" Stella asked as they cleared the dishes. "Job offer. Task force to fight human trafficking." And Nathaniel looked around the table at his family. His brother who had risked everything to expose corruption, his sister-in-law who was channeling her trauma into helping others, His nephew who had survived nightmare and emerged stronger, and his wife who had stood by him through the darkest period of their lives. I think it's something I need to do. Stella nodded. I know. You've never been able to walk away from people who need help. None of us have, Devin added. It's what makes us Fletchers. Later that night, as Nathaniel tucked Joey into bed, the boy looked up at him with serious eyes. Uncle Nate, are you going to keep fighting bad guys? When I have to, yes. Good. Because there are other kids out there who need someone to save them, right? Right. Then you have to help them. That's what heroes do. Out of the mouths of babes, Nathaniel thought for the second time in 6 months. The next morning, he called Julie Madden and accepted her offer. 6 weeks later, Nathaniel Fletcher stood in a briefing room at FBI headquarters, studying intelligence reports about a new trafficking network that had emerged in the Pacific Northwest. The criminals were sophisticated, well-funded, and utterly ruthless in their exploitation of vulnerable victims. They had no idea what was coming for them. As he reviewed operational plans with his new team, Nathaniel thought about Walter Lindsay rotting in federal prison, Glenn Ballard facing life in solitary confinement, and 16 professional killers who had underestimated what a man would do to protect his family. Evil had many faces, but justice had Nathaniel Fletcher's. And he was just getting started. The war against those who preyed on the innocent would never truly end. But as long as people like the Fletcher family were willing to stand up and fight, evil would never have the final word. In his desk drawer, Nathaniel kept a photo from Joey's 7th birthday party. In it, 12 children who had been rescued from Glenn Ballard's laboratory were laughing and playing together, their faces bright with the possibility of futures they almost didn't have. They were alive because someone had cared enough to fight for them. And that, Nathaniel knew, was what made all the darkness worth enduring. The hero's journey never really ends. It just finds new battles worth fighting and new people worth saving. As Nathaniel Fletcher prepared to face whatever evil awaited in the Pacific Northwest, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win decisively. And when they do, the victory belongs to everyone who refuses to let evil triumph unopposed. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The night everything changed. The sterile hospital lights hummed overhead as Clinton Garrett sat beside his 8-year-old son Jimmy's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of the boy's chest. The machines beeped rhythmically, the only sound breaking the suffocating silence of the pediatric ICU. Jimmy's small face was pale against the white pillows, his body broken for what everyone called an accident. Clinton's weathered hands, scarred from 20 years of construction work, trembled as he brushed a strand of hair from his son's forehead. At 42, Clinton had built an empire from nothing, starting with a single hammer and ending with Garrett Construction, the most respected building company in 3 counties. But all his success meant nothing now. Mr. Garrett? Dr. Patricia Reynolds approached, her expression grave. Clinton had known Patricia since high school. They dated briefly before he met Andrea. Her medical coat couldn't hide the sympathy in her eyes. I need to speak with you. Clinton stood slowly, his 6'3" frame casting a shadow over the small bed. His steel gray eyes, which had intimidated countless business rivals, now held a father's desperation. How bad is it, Pat? She glanced around, ensuring privacy. The internal bleeding is severe. We've done everything we can, but... She paused, struggling with the words. Clinton, I don't think Jimmy will survive the night. I'm sorry. The words hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Clinton's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists. He'd survived poverty, built a fortune, and crushed anyone who stood in his way. But he couldn't fight this. Where's Andrea? Dr. Reynolds asked gently. Clinton's expression darkened. His wife of 12 years had been acting strange lately. Distant, secretive. When the call came about Jimmy's accident, she'd seemed almost relieved. Then, 2 hours ago, she'd simply vanished. As if summoned by their conversation, Andrea Garrett appeared in the doorway. At 36, she retained the beauty that had first caught Clinton's eye at a community college dance. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, makeup flawless despite the circumstances. She wore an expensive dress, one Clinton didn't remember buying her. "Clinton," she said, her voice oddly flat. "I need to talk to you." Dr. Reynolds excused herself, leaving the couple alone beside their dying son. Andrea didn't even glance at Jimmy as she spoke. "I can't do this anymore," she said, checking her phone. "This whole situation, it's too much." Situation? Clinton's voice was dangerously quiet. "Our son is dying, Andrea." She shrugged, the gesture chilling in its callousness. "These things happen. Look, I've already made arrangements with Morrison Funeral Home. Bury him cheaply. I won't be attending." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Clinton stared at his wife, trying to process what he'd just heard. In 12 years of marriage, he'd seen Andrea's selfishness, her materialistic nature, but this. "What did you just say?" Andrea was already backing toward the door. "I'm leaving, Clinton. Don't try to find me. And don't expect me to waste money on an elaborate funeral for a kid who was probably going to amount to nothing anyway." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor. Clinton stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of her betrayal. His wife, the mother of his child, had just abandoned their dying son with instructions to bury him cheaply. Hours later, Clinton sat alone with Jimmy as the boy's breathing grew shallower. The doctors had done what they could. Now it was just a matter of waiting. Clinton held his son's small hand, whispering stories of construction sites and fishing trips they'd taken together. "Dad!" Jimmy's voice was barely a whisper. Clinton leaned closer. "I'm here, buddy. I left something for you." "Important." Jimmy's eyes struggled to focus. "My socks. Check my socks." Before Clinton could ask what he meant, Jimmy's eyes closed, and the machines began their final, devastating song. 2 hours later, Clinton sat in the hospital's family room, numb with grief. The funeral director had been contacted, arrangements made. Jimmy's body had been taken away, but not before Clinton had honored his son's final request. Removing Jimmy's small socks in the privacy of the hospital room, Clinton had found something impossible, a small brass key, no bigger than his thumb, taped carefully to the bottom of Jimmy's right foot. With it was a tiny piece of paper with Jimmy's careful 8-year-old handwriting. "Use this to unlock what's inside." Now, staring at the key in his palm, Clinton felt the first stirring of something other than grief. Questions. How had Jimmy gotten this key? What did it unlock? And why had his son, in his final moments, made sure Clinton found it? The key was warm from his son's skin, and engraved on one side was a small number, 247. Clinton turned it over and over, his builder's mind analyzing its construction. This wasn't a house key or a car key. This looked like it belonged to a safety deposit box or a locker. As dawn broke over the hospital parking lot, Clinton Garrett sat in his truck, staring at the key that his dying son had somehow hidden from everyone, including the medical staff who'd examined every inch of Jimmy's broken body. The boy had been unconscious since the accident, unable to walk or even move. So how had Jimmy gotten this key? And what had he meant by what's inside? Clinton started his truck, his grief beginning to crystallize into something else entirely. For the first time since the accident, he felt the familiar stirring of his predatory instincts, the same instincts that had built his empire and destroyed his enemies. Someone was going to pay for what happened to Jimmy, and this key was going to show him who. Chapter 2. Unlocking the Truth. 3 days after Jimmy's funeral, a modest affair attended only by Clinton, his foreman Jerry Atkinson, and Dr. Reynolds. Clinton stood in the lobby of First National Bank, the brass key heavy in his pocket. He'd spent sleepless nights visiting every bank, post office, and storage facility in 3 counties, looking for box number 247. Mr. Garrett, the bank manager, Jeffrey Stokes, approached with obvious nervousness. Jeffrey had been at the funeral, one of the few who'd known Jimmy personally. "I heard about the key. Box 247 has been paid for through a trust. one set up in Jimmy's name. Clinton's blood chilled. My 8-year-old son set up a trust. No, sir. Someone else did, using Jimmy's name. The account was opened 6 months ago. Jeffrey led Clinton down to the vault, his hands shaking as he inserted his master key alongside Clinton's. Mr. Garrett, whatever's in here, maybe you should have someone with you. Open it. The box slid out with a metallic scrape. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with documents and a small digital camera. Clinton's hands were steady as he opened the envelope, but what he found made his vision blur with rage. Photographs. Dozens of them. Andrea and Wade Knapp, a local real estate developer Clinton had considered a friend, in intimate poses dating back 8 months. But these weren't just affair photos. The timestamps showed something far more sinister. They'd been planning Jimmy's accident. Text message printouts revealed the horrible truth. Wade had been pressuring Andrea to leave Clinton for months, but she'd refused to give up her comfortable lifestyle. The solution they devised was elegant in its cruelty. Remove Jimmy from the equation, inherit Clinton's construction empire through Clinton's grief-induced breakdown or death, then eliminate Clinton himself. The kid's too attached to his daddy, read one of Andrea's messages. Clinton would never abandon him. We need a permanent solution. Wade's response chilled Clinton's blood. My guy can make it look like an accident. Brake failure on that steep hill by the quarry. Kid walks to school that way every day. The final document was a life insurance policy on Jimmy, one Clinton had never seen before. Andrea had taken out 6 months ago, naming herself as the sole beneficiary. $2 million. Clinton's hands crumpled the papers as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. Andrea and Wade hadn't just planned to kill Jimmy. They'd plotted to murder Clinton too, making it look like a grief-stricken suicide after losing his son. The life insurance money would fund their new life together. But how had Jimmy known? How had an 8-year-old boy discovered his mother's plan to murder him? The digital camera held the answer. Clinton scrolled through dozens of photos Jimmy had taken in secret. Images of his mother and Wade together, screenshots of text messages Jimmy had photographed from Andrea's phone, even audio recordings the clever boy had made using the camera's voice memo function. The final recording was time-stamped 2 days before the accident. Jimmy's small voice whispered into the camera, "Mom and Uncle Wade are going to hurt me. They think I don't know, but I heard them. Mom said she need me gone so she can have all of Daddy's money. If something happens to me, Daddy, use this to make them pay. I love you." Clinton's vision turned red. His son, his brilliant, brave son, had known he was going to die and had spent his final days gathering evidence to protect his father. Jimmy had somehow managed to hide the key and the safety deposit box from everyone, even while knowing his mother planned to murder him. The boy had died not just protecting Clinton, but arming him for war. Clinton carefully photographed every document with his phone, then sealed the originals back in the safety deposit box. He'd learned long ago that evidence was worthless if it could be destroyed. But more importantly, he'd learned that the best revenge wasn't just about punishment. It was about making the guilty destroy themselves. Leaving the bank, Clinton drove to the construction site where Jerry Atkinson was overseeing a new apartment complex. Jerry had been with Garrett Construction for 15 years, a former Marine who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to build instead of destroy. "Boss," Jerry approached, concern etched on his weathered face. "How you holding up?" Clinton handed Jerry the phone, letting him scroll through the evidence. Jerry's expression grew darker with each image, his military bearing returning as he processed what he was seeing. "Jesus Christ, Clinton. They killed Jimmy for insurance money. Worse than that." Clinton's voice was deadly calm. "They plan to kill me too. Make it look like suicide from grief." Jerry handed back the phone, his jaw set. "What do you need me to do?" "I need to know everything about Wade Knapp. Everything. His business, his family, his weaknesses. And I need to know where Andrea is hiding." Jerry nodded. "I've got contacts from the Corps. They can find anyone, dig up anything." "Good. But Jerry," Clinton's gray eyes were like winter steel. "This doesn't end with exposing them. This doesn't end with prison or lawsuits. They murder my son. They're going to pay in ways that'll make them beg for death." That evening, Clinton sat in Jimmy's room, surrounded by his son's drawings and school projects. On the desk was Jimmy's latest art assignment, a family portrait showing Clinton and Jimmy fishing together. Andrea was nowhere in the picture. Even in his child's art, Jimmy had known the truth about his mother. Clinton opened his laptop and began researching Wade Knapp's business empire. Wade owned 3 apartment complexes, a small shopping center, and had been aggressively expanding his real estate holdings. More importantly, Wade was leveraged to the hilt, owing money to some very unpleasant people. A plan began forming in Clinton's mind, not just for revenge, but for complete and utter destruction. Andrea and Wade had killed Jimmy for money and freedom. Clinton would take both from them, piece by piece, until they had nothing left but the knowledge of what they'd done. And then he'd take their lives, just as they'd taken his son's. His phone rang. Jerry's name appeared on the screen. "Found them," Jerry said without preamble. "Wade's at a lake house about 2 hours north. Neighbors say a redhead moved in last week. Expensive car in the driveway. Lights on every night." Clinton smiled for the first time since Jimmy's death. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Perfect. Tomorrow, we start making them pay." Chapter 3, Building the Trap. Clinton spent the next morning in his office, but not conducting business as usual. Instead, he was orchestrating the systematic destruction of 2 people who believed they were clever enough to murder a child and get away with it. His first call was to Marcus Reed, a private investigator who'd worked several insurance fraud cases for Garrett Construction. Marcus was expensive, discreet, and most importantly, had contacts in some very dark places. "I need everything on Wade Knapp," Clinton told him. "Financial records, business dealings, personal habits, enemies. Everything. How deep you want me to dig?" "All the way to China." "And Marcus?" "I need to know who he owes money to. The kind of people who don't accept late payments." His second call was to Saul Perez, a lawyer who specialized in the kinds of legal problems that traditional attorneys wouldn't touch. Saul had helped Clinton navigate some gray areas in the construction business over the years, and he understood that sometimes justice required creativity. "I need Wade Knapp's business holdings tied up in legal knots," Clinton explained. "Environmental violations, permit issues, building code problems. I don't care what you have to file or who you have to pay off. I want his cash flow strangled." By noon, Clinton had set a dozen wheels in motion. But the call that mattered most came at 1:47 p.m. "Boss." Jerry's voice was tight with excitement. "You need to see this." Clinton drove to Jerry's apartment, a modest place that reflected the foreman's practical nature. Jerry had been busy since their conversation, using his military connections to dig into Wade Knapp's background. "Wade's got problems," Jerry said, spreading photographs across his kitchen table. "Big ones. He owes $800,000 to some casino interests in Atlantic City. The kind that break legs first and ask questions later." The photos showed Wade meeting with 2 men in expensive suits outside a restaurant. Even from a distance, their body language screamed danger. "Vincent Caruso and his nephew Tony," Jerry continued. "They run book for the Torino family. Wade's been making payments, but barely. Word is he's got maybe 2 weeks before they decide he's more valuable as an example than as a debtor." Clinton studied the photographs, his builder's mind seeing the foundation of Wade's destruction. What else? Andrea is spending money like water. Expensive clothes, jewelry, spa treatments. She's burning through cash faster than Wade can steal it. And get this, she's been calling her sister in Miami, talking about starting over somewhere warm. She's planning to run. Gets better. Wade doesn't know. He thinks they're building a life together here. But Andrea is already looking at one-way plane tickets. Clinton felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. Andrea and Wade's greed would be their downfall, but not before he helped things along. "I need you to make contact with these casino people," Clinton said. "Let them know Wade's come into some money recently. Insurance money. Maybe suggest they ask him about it." Jerry grinned wolfishly. "You want them to squeeze him? I want them to break him. But not yet. First, we're going to have some fun." That afternoon, Clinton drove to Knapp Developments, Wade's real estate office in a converted Victorian mansion downtown. Wade's secretary, a young woman named Melanie North, looked nervous as Clinton entered. "Mr. Garrett," she stammered. I'm so sorry about Jimmy. Mr. Knapp said to tell you he's not available today. Clinton smiled pleasantly. That's fine, Melanie. I'm not here to see Wade. I'm here to see you. Melanie's confusion was obvious. Clinton had always been polite during business dealings, but there was something different about him now, something that made her instinctively step back. I understand you've been helping Wade with some special projects lately, Clinton continued. Paperwork that required discretion. Melanie's face went pale. Clinton knew from Marcus Reed's preliminary report that she'd been the one to help Wade set up the fake trust fund for Jimmy's safety deposit box. She probably thought it was some kind of surprise gift. I don't know what you mean. Clinton placed a manila envelope on her desk. These are photos of you notarizing documents for a trust fund in my dead son's name. Documents you never reported to the proper authorities. Melanie opened the envelope with shaking hands. The photos were clear. Marcus Reed was very good at his job. I can have you arrested for fraud, Clinton said conversationally. Falsifying legal documents involving a minor. That's a felony, Melanie. Or what? Or you can help me with a project. Something that will ensure Wade Knapp gets exactly what he deserves. Melanie stared at the photos, her career and freedom hanging in the balance. What kind of project? Clinton leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. The kind where you keep your job, your freedom, and your conscience clean. All you have to do is make sure Wade receives certain phone calls and documents over the next few days. Can you do that? Melanie nodded frantically. She was young, scared, and had no idea she'd been helping a murderer. Clinton felt no guilt about using her fear. She'd unwittingly helped kill Jimmy, and now she'd help avenge him. Good. Tomorrow morning, you're going to receive a package. Inside will be photocopies of insurance documents and a phone number. You'll tell Wade that an insurance investigator called asking about Jimmy's policy. The investigator wants to meet with him personally. But there's no insurance investigator, is there? Clinton's smile was arctic. No, Melanie, there isn't. That evening, Clinton sat in his truck across from Wade's lake house, watching through binoculars as Wade and Andrea played house. They were grilling steaks on the deck, Andrea wearing a dress that cost more than most people made in a month. They looked happy, carefree, like a couple celebrating their good fortune. They had no idea their world was about to collapse. Clinton's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Reed. Wade's been skimming from his rental properties to pay the casino debt. Property management company is already suspicious. One phone call from the right person and they'll audit everything. Another text from Saul Perez. Filed environmental violation reports on all 3 of Wade's apartment complexes. Health Department is scheduling surprise inspections tomorrow. Also triggered IRS audit based on anonymous tip about unreported rental income. The trap was set. Over the next week, Wade would face challenges from every direction: legal, financial, and personal. The pressure would build until he made a mistake, and when he did, Clinton would be waiting. But the real beauty of Clinton's plan wasn't just Wade's destruction. It was the fact that Andrea and Wade would turn on each other when the pressure mounted. Their greed and selfishness, the very traits that had led them to murder Jimmy, would become the weapons Clinton used to destroy them. As Clinton drove home, he passed the hill where Jimmy's accident had occurred. Someone had left flowers by the guardrail. Clinton stopped and added his own, a small construction toy truck, the kind Jimmy had loved to play with. Almost time, buddy, he whispered. Daddy's going to make them pay for what they did to you. The wind picked up, rustling the flowers, and for a moment Clinton could swear he heard his son's voice in the breeze. I love you, Daddy. Make them hurt. Clinton smiled grimly. He'd made a lot of promises in his life, but this was one he intended to keep. Chapter 4. The Pressure Builds. Wade Knapp's world began crumbling at exactly 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. He was sitting in his office, sipping coffee and reviewing rental income reports, when Melanie burst through his door without knocking. Mr. Knapp, there's a problem, she said, her voice shaking. The health department is here. They want to inspect all 3 apartment complexes. They said it's an emergency investigation based on anonymous complaints about code violations. Wade's coffee mug hit the floor, shattering into pieces. What kind of complaints? Mold, faulty wiring, inadequate heating systems. They have warrants. Before Wade could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed the property management company that handled his rental collections. "Wade, we need to talk," came the voice of Patricia Manning, the company's chief financial officer. "There are discrepancies in your accounts. Significant ones." Wade's hand tightened on the phone. Over the past 8 months, he'd been skimming rental payments to cover his gambling debts and fund his lifestyle with Andrea. He'd been careful, taking small amounts from different properties, but apparently not careful enough. "I can explain. The police are on their way to your office," Patricia interrupted. "Don't leave town." The line went dead. Wade stared at his phone, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not now, when he and Andrea were so close to starting their new life together. His phone rang again. This time, the number was unfamiliar. "Wade Knapp." The voice was gravelly, with a distinct Brooklyn accent. "Yeah, who's this?" "Vincent Caruso. I think you know why I'm calling." Wade's blood turned to ice. Vincent Caruso was the casino enforcer he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. Their last conversation had ended with Vincent promising to visit Wade if the next payment was late. "Vincent, I can explain. I've got the money. You better. All of it. 800 grand, plus the 20% interest we discussed. You got 48 hours. 48 hours? That's impossible. Then you better get creative. Because after 48 hours, my nephew Tony starts paying visits to people you care about. Starting with that redhead you've been shacking up with." The line went dead, leaving Wade staring at his phone in horror. In the span of 10 minutes, his entire world had collapsed. The health department was shutting down his properties, the police were investigating his finances, and the mob was threatening to kill Andrea. Wade grabbed his car keys and raced toward the lake house. He had to warn Andrea, had to figure out how they were going to get out of this mess. But as he drove, his phone kept ringing. The IRS, his insurance company, the Environmental Protection Agency. It was like everyone had decided to investigate Wade Knapp on the same day. Meanwhile, Clinton Garrett sat in his office, fielding updates from his team with grim satisfaction. Marcus Reed called first. "The health department found exactly what we planted," Marcus reported. "Mold samples in the ventilation systems, faulty wiring in the utility rooms, documentation of inadequate heating repairs. Wade's apartment complexes will be condemned by Friday." Jerry called 20 minutes later. "Vincent Caruso is pissed. His boy Tony just drove by Wade's office twice. They're not playing around." Saul Perez delivered the best news of all. The IRS audit turned up a gold mine. Wade's been underreporting rental income for 3 years. They're freezing his accounts pending investigation. He won't be able to access a dime. Clinton allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before making his next call. He dialed the lake house, knowing Wade would be racing there in a panic. Andrea answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting. "Hello. Andrea, it's Clinton." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Andrea finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Clinton, I didn't expect to hear from you. I imagine not. Especially since you've been so busy lately. New house, new lifestyle, new boyfriend." Another pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." Clinton's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "I'm talking about Wade Knapp, Andrea. I'm talking about the insurance policy you took out on our son. I'm talking about the text messages planning Jimmy's murder." The phone slipped from Andrea's hand, clattering to the floor. When she picked it up, Clinton could hear her breathing heavily. "You don't have any proof of anything," she whispered. "Actually, I have quite a bit of proof. Jimmy made sure of that before you killed him. Jimmy was 8 years old. He didn't know anything. Our son was brilliant, Andrea. Much smarter than you gave him credit for. He knew you were planning to murder him, and he spent his last days making sure you'd pay for it." Andrea's voice cracked. "You're lying. Safety deposit box 247 at First National Bank. Your loving son left me quite a collection of evidence. Photos, text messages, audio recordings. Everything I need to put you and Wade on death row." The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted their conversation. Through the lake house windows, Andrea could see Wade's BMW speeding up the gravel drive, dust clouds billowing behind it. "Looks like Wade's coming home," Clinton observed, though he was miles away. You might want to ask him about his conversation with Vincent Caruso, or the police investigation into his embezzlement, or the IRS audit. It's been quite a day for your boyfriend. The line went dead just as Wade burst through the front door, his face pale and his clothes disheveled. Andrea, we have to leave. Now, pack everything. We're getting out of here tonight. Andrea stared at him, Clinton's words echoing in her mind. What happened? Everything's falling apart. The cops, the IRS, the health department. Someone's orchestrating this, making it all happen at once. Clinton knows, Andrea whispered. He called. He knows about Jimmy, about us, about everything. Wade's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. We're dead. Vincent Caruso wants 800 grand in 2 days, or he kills us both. The cops want me for embezzlement. And if Clinton has evidence about Jimmy. We run, Andrea said, her voice gaining strength. Tonight, we take what cash we have and disappear. With what money? Wade laughed bitterly. My accounts are frozen. The properties are condemned. About maybe $5,000 in cash, and that won't get us out of the state, let alone the country. Andrea walked to the window, staring out at the lake. In the distance, she could see a lone fisherman in a small boat, too far away to make out clearly. Something about the figure seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. There has to be something we can do, she said. Some way to fix this. Wade stood up, pacing frantically. The only thing that would save us is if Clinton dies before he can give that evidence to the police. But we already tried that once, and look how it turned out. Maybe we don't have to kill him, Andrea said slowly. Maybe we just have to convince him to keep quiet. Ow! Andrea turned from the window, her expression calculating. Clinton loved Jimmy more than anything. What if we told him we could bring Jimmy back? Wade stared at her. What are you talking about? There's a doctor in Switzerland. Experimental procedures. If we could convince Clinton that Jimmy's death wasn't permanent, that there was a chance to save him. You're insane. Jimmy's dead. We made sure of that. But Clinton doesn't know how much we know about medicine, Andrea continued, her voice growing excited. We could create fake documents, forge medical reports, make it believe there's hope. Wade shook his head. It'll never work. Clinton's too smart for that. Clinton's grieving. Grieving people believe what they want to believe. As they talked, neither of them noticed the fishermen on the lake had moved closer to shore. If they had looked carefully, they might have recognized Clinton Garrett, sitting patiently in his small boat, listening to every word through the long-range listening device pointed at their window. Clinton smiled grimly as he recorded their conversation. They were planning another deception, another manipulation. But this time, he'd be ready for them. This time, they'd walk straight into his trap. Chapter 5. The Net Closes. The next morning, Clinton sat in his office reviewing the audio recording from the lake house when Jerry knocked on his door. Boss, we got company, Jerry said, stepping aside to reveal Vincent Caruso and his nephew Tony. Vincent was exactly what Clinton had expected. A man in his 50s with silver hair, expensive clothes, and the kind of calm demeanor that came from years of violence. Tony was younger, broader, with the look of someone who enjoyed his work a little too much. Mr. Garrett, Vincent said, settling into the chair across from Clinton's desk. I understand you, and I have a mutual interest in Wade Knapp. Clinton leaned back in his chair, studying the two men. What kind of interest? The kind where he owes me $800,000, and you want him to suffer for personal reasons. Vincent's smile was razor thin. My sources tell me you've been pressuring Mr. Knapp lately. Your sources are well-informed. Tony spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble. We heard about your kid. That's rough. You want revenge. We want our money. Maybe we can help each other. Clinton had been expecting this conversation. When you stirred up someone's life the way he'd been stirring up Wade's, other interested parties inevitably noticed. What are you proposing? Vincent pulled out a manila folder, spreading photographs across Clinton's desk. They showed Wade and Andrea at the lake house, shopping, dining out. The surveillance was professional quality. Wade thinks he's going to run, Vincent said. Pack up his girlfriend and disappear. But running requires money, and thanks to your efforts, Wade's broke. So desperate people do desperate things. Wade's going to try something stupid to get money fast. When he does, we want to be there. Clinton studied the photographs, his mind working. What do you want from me? Information. You seem to know Wade's moves before he makes them. We want to know when and where he's going to surface next. Tony leaned forward. Plus, we heard you got evidence about your kid's death. Evidence that could put Wade away forever. I might. We don't want Wade in prison, Vincent said bluntly. We want him alive and paying what he owes. But if you're planning to kill him, he shrugged. We want our money first. Clinton made a decision that would have surprised his old self, the man he'd been before Jimmy's murder. I'm not planning to kill Wade. Vincent raised an eyebrow. No, I'm planning to destroy him. Completely. Take everything he values, everyone he loves, every hope he has for the future. Death would be mercy. Tony laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. I like this guy. Here's what I propose, Clinton continued. You get your money. I get my revenge. But we do it my way. Vincent considered this. What's your way? Clinton pulled out his phone, playing the audio recording from the lake house. Vincent and Tony listened to Andrea and Wade's plan to deceive Clinton about Jimmy's death, their voices growing darker with each word. They're planning to manipulate a grieving father, Vincent said when the recording ended. That's low, even for scumbags like them. Which is why they're going to walk right into our trap, Clinton replied. Wade needs money. You want your money. I want them to suffer. So we're going to give Wade a chance to get money, a chance that will destroy them both. Clinton outlined his plan. It was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its efficiency. Vincent and Tony would offer Wade a job, something that seemed like easy money but was actually a setup. Wade would jump at the opportunity, desperate to solve his financial problems. But the job would require him to betray Andrea, and Andrea's reaction would provide Clinton with the final piece of evidence he needed. You want us to turn them against each other, Vincent said admiringly. Beautiful. More than that, I want them to destroy each other. And when they're done, you get your money, Wade learns what real suffering feels like, and Andrea pays for murdering my son. That afternoon, Wade received a phone call that seemed like a gift from heaven. The caller identified himself as Marcus Torino, Vincent Caruso's cousin, with a business proposition. I hear you're having some cash flow problems, Marcus said. I might have a solution. They met at a restaurant downtown, far from Wade's usual haunts. Marcus was a thin man with nervous energy and the kind of expensive watch that suggested serious money. I need someone to transport some merchandise, Marcus explained. Nothing dangerous, just some items that need to move from point A to point B without attracting attention. One job, $50,000 cash. Wade's desperation made him ignore the obvious red flags. What kind of merchandise? The kind you don't ask questions about. You pick up a package in Philadelphia, drive it to Richmond, hand it over. 8 hours work, 50 grand. When? Tomorrow night. But there's a condition. Marcus leaned forward. You go alone. No girlfriends, no partners, no backup. This is a one-man job. Wade's mind raced. 50,000 would buy them time, maybe enough to disappear before Vincent Caruso's deadline expired. And it was just one drive, one night. I'll do it. Marcus smiled. Good. I'll call you tomorrow with the details. As Wade drove back to the lake house, he felt hope for the first time in days. Andrea would be thrilled. They could take the money and run, start over somewhere Vincent Caruso would never find them. But when he arrived at the lake house, Andrea was packing frantically. We have to leave tonight, she said without preamble. I've been thinking about what Clinton said. He has evidence, real evidence. We can't wait. I might have a solution, Wade said, explaining the job offer. Andrea stopped packing, her expression suspicious. 50,000 for one drive? Wade, that's obviously illegal. So what? We're already in deep trouble. What's one more crime? What if it's a setup? What if Clinton's behind this? Wade hadn't considered that possibility, but Andrea's paranoia was contagious. You think he'd work with the mob? I think he'd work with the devil himself to get revenge for Jimmy. They argued for hours, their stress and fear turning them against each other. Andrea insisted they flee immediately with what little money they had. Wade argued that 50,000 would give them real options, a real chance to escape. Fine, Andrea finally said. Take your mobster job, but I'm not waiting around to see if it's a trap. What are you talking about? I'm leaving tonight, with or without you. Wade stared at her, seeing his future crumbling. You're abandoning me? I'm saving myself. Something you should have thought about before you borrowed money from killers. Neither of them noticed the small electronic device that had been planted in their living room during their argument, or the fact that every word was being transmitted to a receiver in Clinton Garrett's truck, parked a half-mile away. Clinton listened to their fight with cold satisfaction. The pressure was working exactly as he'd planned. Wade and Andrea were turning on each other, their selfishness and greed poisoning the relationship they'd murdered Jimmy to protect. Tomorrow night, Wade would drive to Philadelphia to pick up a package that didn't exist, walking into a trap that would finish him forever. And Andrea would run, thinking she was escaping, only to find that Clinton had planned for that possibility too. Phase 1 of their destruction was complete. Now came the real pain. Chapter 6, The Breaking Point. Wade drove toward Philadelphia the next evening with $50,000 dancing in his mind and dread growing in his stomach. Andrea had left that morning without a goodbye, taking her expensive clothes and jewelry, but leaving behind any pretense of love or loyalty. The meeting point was a warehouse in North Philadelphia, the kind of industrial wasteland where bad things happen to naive people. Wade's hands shook as he pulled into the empty parking lot, his headlights cutting through the darkness. A man emerged from the shadows. Not Marcus Torino, but Tony Caruso. Wade's blood turned to ice as he recognized Vincent's nephew. Get out of the car, Wade. Wade considered running, but Tony's hand rested casually on his jacket, where the outline of a gun was visible. Wade climbed out slowly, his legs unsteady. Where's Marcus? He's supposed to give me the package. Tony laughed. There is no package, you idiot. And there is no Marcus Torino. You just drove 3 hours to your own execution. More men emerged from the warehouse. 4 of them, all with the predatory look of career criminals. Wade was surrounded, alone, and completely helpless. Wait, Wade stammered. I can get you money. All of it. Just give me more time. Time's up, Tony said. But before we end this, my uncle wants to have a conversation with you. Vincent Caruso stepped out of a black sedan, his expression calm, but his eyes promising violence. Wade, you look terrible. Vincent, please. I can explain everything. I'm sure you can. But first, I want you to understand something. Vincent nodded toward the warehouse. Your girlfriend isn't as smart as she thinks she is. 2 more men emerged from the building, dragging a struggling figure between them. Andrea, her expensive clothes torn and her perfect makeup smeared with tears. Wade, she screamed. Help me. Wade's world tilted. How did you? She left this morning. We've been watching both of you for days, Vincent explained conversationally. When Andrea tried to run, we were ready. Picked her up at the airport trying to board a plane to Miami. Tony grinned. She had a suitcase full of jewelry and about 30 grand in cash. Nice little nest egg she was planning to start over with. Wade stared at Andrea, understanding flooding through him. You were leaving me. Permanently. Wait, no. I was going to send for you once it was safe. Bullshit. Wade's grief and fear crystallized into rage. You were going to disappear and leave me to die. Vincent watched their confrontation with professional interest. This was exactly what he'd hoped for. Desperate people turning on each other, making mistakes that could be exploited. Here's what's going to happen, Vincent announced. You 2 are going to settle your debts. All of them. To me, and to someone else who has an interest in your situation. A new vehicle pulled into the parking lot. Clinton Garrett's pickup truck. Wade and Andrea watched in horror as Clinton climbed out, carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression that promised terrible things. Clinton, Andrea whispered. How did you find you? I never lost you. Clinton's voice was conversational, almost friendly. I've been watching every move you've made since the day you abandoned our dying son. Vincent stepped back, giving Clinton space. This had been their deal. Vincent would corner Wade and Andrea, and Clinton would have his confrontation. You killed Jimmy for insurance money, Clinton continued, opening the folder. $2 million that you thought would fund your new life together. But you made one mistake. What mistake? Wade demanded. Clinton smiled coldly. You underestimated my son. Jimmy knew what you were planning. He spent his last days gathering evidence against you. Clinton pulled out photographs, audio transcripts, insurance documents. Every text message planning his murder. Every meeting you had. Every cruel thing you said about a child you were planning to kill. Andrea's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees in the gravel, sobbing. We didn't mean for it to happen like that. You meant for it to happen exactly like that, Clinton replied. You researched the best way to kill a child and make it look accidental. You took out an insurance policy on his life. You planned to murder me after my grief made me convenient to eliminate. Wade backed away, but Tony's men blocked his escape. Clinton, we can work something out. The insurance money has been donated to a children's hospital in Jimmy's name. Clinton interrupted. Every penny. You killed my son for nothing. Vincent cleared his throat. Speaking of money, Wade still owes me $800,000. Plus interest. Clinton reached into his jacket, pulling out a cashier's check. Wade's debt to you is now paid in full. Vincent examined the check, his eyebrows rising. This is for $1.2 million. The extra is for your patience and cooperation. Wade stared in shock. You paid my debt? Why? Clinton's smile was arctic. Because I don't want you dead quickly. I want you alive to suffer for what you did to Jimmy. Vincent pocketed the check. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Garrett. Wade, Andrea, consider yourselves very lucky. And very stupid. Vincent and his men climbed into their vehicles and drove away, leaving Wade and Andrea alone with Clinton in the empty lot. The silence stretched for long minutes, broken only by Andrea's sobbing. What happens now? Wade finally asked. Now you learn what it feels like to lose everything, Clinton replied. Your business is destroyed. Your properties are condemned. Your girlfriend tried to abandon you. Your reputation is ruined. The police are investigating your embezzlement. The IRS has frozen your assets. But Vincent said, Vincent got his money. You get to live with the knowledge that you murdered an innocent child and gained nothing from it. No money, no freedom, no love, no future. Clinton walked back toward his truck, then paused. Oh, and Wade? The police will receive copies of Jimmy's evidence tomorrow morning. Andrea's too. You'll both be arrested for first-degree murder. Andrea looked up from the gravel, her makeup completely destroyed. Clinton, please. We can make this right somehow. Make it right. Clinton's voice dropped to a whisper. You want to make murdering my son right? We could do charity work. Help other children. Show that we're sorry. Clinton stared at her for a long moment, and for just an instant, Andrea thought she saw a flicker of something other than hatred in his eyes. Then he spoke, and any hope she might have felt died instantly. Jimmy left me one more message, Andrea. Want to hear it? Without waiting for an answer, Clinton pulled out his phone and played an audio file. Jimmy's young voice filled the night air. Daddy, if something happens to me, don't forgive them. They're going to say they're sorry, but they're not. They're just sorry they got caught. Make them pay for what they did. Make them hurt like they hurt us. I love you, Daddy. Get them. The recording ended. Andrea and Wade stared at Clinton, finally understanding that there would be no mercy, no forgiveness, no second chances. Tomorrow, you'll be arrested, Clinton said. You'll spend the rest of your lives in prison, assuming you survive that long. Child killers don't do well in general population. Clinton climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving Wade and Andrea stranded in the dark parking lot with no money, no transportation, and no hope. Their nightmare was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Hammer Falls. The arrest came at dawn, exactly as Clinton had promised. Wade was taken from a cheap motel room where he'd spent the night, while Andrea was found sleeping in her car outside a gas station, having nowhere else to go after their confrontation in the parking lot. The media coverage was immediate and brutal. Local mother and lover charged Ian's son's murder screamed the headlines, accompanied by photos of Jimmy smiling at a school event and crime scene photos from the accident that investigators now revealed had been carefully orchestrated. Clinton watched the news coverage from his office, Jerry beside him with a cup of coffee and a satisfied expression. DA says they're going for the death penalty, Jerry reported. Both of them. Evidence is overwhelming. Good. Clinton's voice was flat, emotionless. The rage that had sustained him through weeks of planning had crystallized into cold satisfaction. His phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for the county jail. Mr. Garrett? The voice was broken, desperate. It's Andrea. They let me make one phone call, and I had to try. What do you want, Andrea? Clinton, please. I know you hate me, and you have every right to, but I'm begging you. There has to be some way we can work this out. Clinton leaned back in his chair, considering. Work what out? I'll confess. I'll tell them everything, take full responsibility. I'll say Wade didn't know anything about the plan. Just, please don't let them execute me. Why would I care if they execute you? Because I know you're not a killer. You're angry, and you should be, but you're not like us. You wouldn't really want someone to die. Clinton was quiet for so long that Andrea thought the call had been disconnected. Andrea, he finally said, you kill my son. You murdered an 8-year-old boy for money. You told me to bury him cheaply and walked away while he was dying. I know, and I'm not finished. Clinton's voice cut through her words like a blade. You want to know what kind of man I am? I'm the kind who spent 3 weeks systematically destroying your life and your boyfriend's life before having you arrested. I'm the kind who paid off your mob debt just to keep you alive long enough to suffer properly. What are you saying? I'm saying that when they strap you to that execution table, I'll be in the front row. And when they ask if you have any last words, I hope you remember Jimmy's face. The line went dead. Andrea stared at the phone, finally understanding the complete hopelessness of her situation. But Clinton wasn't finished with his revenge. That afternoon, he received a visitor he'd been expecting, Andrea's sister, Rochelle Levy, who'd driven up from Miami after hearing about the arrests. Rochelle was younger than Andrea, with the same auburn hair, but none of the hardness that had developed in her sister over the years. She sat across from Clinton in his office, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Garrett, I'm so sorry about Jimmy. I love that little boy like he was my own nephew. Clinton studied her, seeing genuine grief in her eyes. What do you want, Rochelle? I want to understand how my sister could do something so horrible. Andrea wasn't always like this. She used to be kind, caring. Something changed her. Greed changed her. Maybe, but there's something else. Rochelle hesitated, then pulled out a manila envelope. I found this in Andrea's apartment in Miami. She'd been planning to move down there permanently. Clinton opened the envelope, finding documents that made his blood run cold. Medical records, psychiatric evaluations, prescription receipts. Andrea had been seeing a therapist for months, complaining of intrusive thoughts about harming her family. She's been planning this for almost a year, Rochelle whispered. The therapist's notes mention her talking about removing obstacles to her happiness. Clinton read through the documents, his anger reaching new heights. Andrea hadn't just decided to kill Jimmy on impulse. She'd been fantasizing about murdering her own son for months. Why are you showing me this? Because I think there's more. I think Andrea might have. Rochelle's voice broke. I think she might have hurt other children. The implications hit Clinton like a physical blow. What other children? Andrea worked at a daycare center before she married you. 3 children died of accidents during the year she was there. The center was shut down, but no charges were ever filed. Clinton stared at the documents, pieces of a horrible puzzle falling into place. Jimmy hadn't been Andrea's first victim. He'd been a final step in a pattern of child murder that had gone undetected for years. I need copies of everything you have, Clinton said. Of course. But Mr. Garrett, what are you going to do with this information? Clinton's smile was terrible to behold. I'm going to make sure Andrea pays for every child she's ever hurt. That evening, Clinton met with the district attorney, providing the new evidence that transformed the case from a single murder charge to a potential serial killing investigation. The DA's office immediately began reviewing the deaths at the daycare center, and by morning, Andrea faced additional charges in the deaths of 3 more children. Wade, meanwhile, had been abandoned by his legal team when it became clear he couldn't pay their fees. Sitting in his jail cell, he'd had time to think about the complete destruction of his life. The man who'd once owned properties worth millions was now facing execution for a crime that had gained him nothing. His cellmate, a career criminal named Buddy Blake, was amused by Wade's situation. You killed a kid for money and didn't even get the money? Buddy laughed. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. I didn't know it would end like this, Wade protested. Of course you didn't. You're not a real criminal, just a stupid rich boy who thought he was smarter than everybody else. Wade's lawyer, overworked public defender named Jeffrey Stokes, visited him that afternoon with more bad news. The prosecution is offering a deal, Jeffrey said. Life without parole if you testify against Andrea. What kind of testimony? They want you to confirm that she was the mastermind, that she planned everything and manipulated you into going along with it. Wade considered this. Life in prison was better than execution, and Andrea had tried to abandon him anyway. What happens to her if I testify? She gets the death penalty for sure. Multiple counts of first-degree murder. Wade thought about Andrea's plan to run away to Miami, leaving him to face Vincent Caruso's wrath alone. He thought about her cold instructions to bury Jimmy cheaply. He thought about the years he'd wasted loving someone who'd never loved him back. I'll do it, he said. When Andrea learned of Wade's betrayal, she screamed so loudly that guards had to sedate her. Her own lawyer tried to negotiate a similar deal, but the prosecution wasn't interested. Andrea was the mastermind, the serial killer, the monster who'd murdered children for money and convenience. Clinton received updates on both cases from the DA's office, watching as his careful planning brought about the complete destruction of the people who'd killed his son. But even as justice moved forward, he found no satisfaction in their suffering. Nothing would bring Jimmy back. Nothing would undo the pain of losing his child. But at least the world would know that killing Jimmy Garrett had been the worst mistake Andrea and Wade could have made. Their punishment was just beginning. Chapter 8. No Mercy. 3 months later, Clinton sat in the courthouse as Wade Knapp took the witness stand to testify against Andrea. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, but Wade's testimony would seal Andrea's fate. Wade looked broken. Prison had not been kind to him. His expensive clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit, his confident demeanor replaced with the haunted look of a man who'd lost everything. He avoided looking at Andrea as he was sworn in. Mr. Knapp, the prosecutor began, please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant. Wade's voice was barely audible. Andrea and I were involved romantically for about 8 months before Jimmy's death. And during this relationship, did Mrs. Garrett ever discuss her feelings about her son? Wade glanced at Clinton, then quickly looked away. She said Jimmy was an obstacle, that Clinton would never leave him or let her take him away from his father. Did she suggest a solution to this problem? She said, Wade's voice broke. She said the only way we could be together was if Jimmy was gone permanently. Andrea's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. Wade continued his devastating testimony, describing in detail how Andrea had researched ways to kill children, how she'd taken out the insurance policy, how she'd planned Clinton's death as well. She told me Clinton was weak, Wade said, that he'd probably kill himself from grief after losing Jimmy, making everything easier for us. Clinton listened to every word, his face impassive. But inside, his rage burned hotter with each revelation of Andrea's calculated cruelty. When the defense cross-examined Wade, they tried to paint him as the mastermind, manipulating Andrea's emotions for his own gain. But Wade's complete breakdown on the stand made it clear he was a weak man who'd been dominated by a predator. I know I deserve to die for what I did, Wade sobbed during redirect examination. But Andrea, she's not human. She planned to kill a child like other people plan a vacation. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Jimmy's hidden recordings, the insurance documents, the daycare center deaths, Wade's testimony. But the most damning evidence came from Andrea herself. Against her lawyer's advice, Andrea had insisted on testifying in her own defense. She took the stand wearing a conservative dress, her hair pulled back, tried to project innocence and remorse. It was a catastrophic mistake. Mrs. Garrett, the prosecutor asked, "Do you love your son?" "Of course I loved Jimmy," Andrea replied, her voice carefully modulated. "Then why did you refer to burying him cheaply?" Andrea's composure cracked slightly. "I was in shock. People say things they don't mean when they're grieving." "Were you grieving, Mrs. Garrett? Or were you relieved?" "Objection." Sustained. The prosecutor shifted tactics. "Mrs. Garrett, How do you explain the insurance policy you took out on Jimmy's life? I was thinking about his future. College, medical emergencies. A $2 million policy on an 8-year-old. I wanted him protected. Protected from what? The accident you were planning. That's not. I never. The prosecutor played one of Jimmy's secret recordings. Andrea's voice filled the courtroom. The kid's too attached to his daddy. Clinton would never abandon him. We need a permanent solution. Andrea stared at the speaker as her own words condemned her. She'd forgotten about that conversation, forgotten that Jimmy might have been listening. That's taken out of context, she said weakly. What context makes planning a child's murder acceptable, Mrs. Garrett? Andrea's careful facade crumbled. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Wade was pushing me, threatening to leave if I didn't do something about Jimmy. So you decided to murder your son? It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The accident was supposed to be quick, painless. The courtroom erupted. Andrea's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Andrea herself seemed to realize what she'd just admitted, her hand flying to her mouth. You're confirming that you planned Jimmy's death? The prosecutor pressed. No. It wasn't murder. It was meant to look like an accident. Because murder and accidental death are different things, Mrs. Garrett. Andrea broke down completely, sobbing and babbling about pressure and fear and Wade's manipulation. But her words only dug her grave deeper. Clinton watched his wife's complete destruction with cold satisfaction. This was what justice looked like, not just punishment, but the complete exposure of evil for what it was. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of Jimmy Garrett. First-degree murder of 3 children at the daycare center. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud. The penalty phase was even shorter. Andrea's death sentence was unanimous. Wade received life without parole in exchange for his testimony, but Clinton knew prison justice would likely be his real sentence. Child killers didn't survive long in general population. After the sentencing, Clinton stood outside the courthouse, facing a crowd of reporters. He'd avoided media attention throughout the trial, but now he had something to say. My son Jimmy was 8 years old when his mother murdered him for money, he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. He was brilliant, kind, and brave. In his final days, knowing he was going to die, he spent his time protecting me and gathering evidence to ensure his killers would be caught. The reporters pressed closer, cameras rolling. Andrea Garrett and Wade Knapp thought they were smart enough to commit the perfect crime. They thought they could murder a child and get away with it. They were wrong. Mr. Garrett, a reporter called out, do you feel justice has been served? Clinton was quiet for a long moment. Justice would be having my son back. What we have is accountability. Andrea Garrett will die for her crimes, and Wade Knapp will spend the rest of his life remembering what it cost him to murder an innocent child. Do you feel any sympathy for them? Clinton's expression hardened. I feel exactly as much sympathy for them as they felt for Jimmy when they killed him. None. As Clinton walked away from the courthouse, his phone buzzed with a text from Jerry. It's over, boss. You got them. But Clinton knew it wasn't over. It would never be over. Jimmy was still dead, and no amount of revenge could change that. Still, his son could rest knowing that his killers had paid the ultimate price for their evil. That would have to be enough. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. 2 years after the trial, Clinton stood in the observation room of the state prison, watching through bulletproof glass as Andrea Garrett was prepared for execution. She'd exhausted all her appeals, fired and hired multiple lawyers, and finally accepted that her death was inevitable. Clinton had been offered the chance to speak with Andrea before her execution. He declined. There was nothing she could say that would matter, and nothing he wanted to hear from her. Wade Knapp had been murdered in prison 18 months earlier, exactly as Clinton had predicted. A group of inmates had learned about his crimes and delivered their own form of justice. Clinton felt no satisfaction at the news. It was simply the natural consequence of Wade's choices. As the execution began, Clinton thought about Jimmy. His son would have been 10 years old now, probably playing Little League baseball or building elaborate constructions with his toy trucks. Instead, Jimmy existed only in memories and in the evidence that had brought his killers to justice. The warden approached Clinton as the process neared its end. She asked if you had any final words for her, he said quietly. Clinton watched Andrea's still form through the glass. Tell her Jimmy says hello. When it was over, Clinton drove to the cemetery where Jimmy was buried. The headstone was simple granite with an inscription that captured everything important. James Jimmy Garrett, beloved son, hero, protector. Clinton sat beside the grave as the sun set, finally allowing himself to feel something other than rage for the first time in 2 years. It's done, buddy, he said quietly. They can't hurt anyone else now. The wind rustled through the trees, and Clinton could almost imagine he heard Jimmy's voice. I love you, Daddy. Thank you for keeping your promise. Clinton had kept many promises in his life, but this was the one that mattered most. Justice for Jimmy, accountability for his killers, and the certainty that their evil had been exposed and punished. He stayed at the cemetery until full darkness fell, talking to his son about construction projects and business deals, about the fishing trips they'd never take and the baseball games they'd never attend. When he finally left, Clinton felt something he hadn't experienced since Jimmy's death. Peace. Not happiness. That might never return completely. But peace in knowing that he'd honored his son's memory and ensured that Jimmy's sacrifice had not been in vain. The boy who died protecting his father had, in the end, protected countless other children by ensuring his killers could never harm again. That was Jimmy's real legacy, and it was enough. 3 months later, Clinton received a letter from a woman named Sally Chamberlain, whose daughter had been one of Andrea's victims at the daycare center. Sally thanked Clinton for never giving up, for pursuing justice when the police had failed her family years earlier. Because of your son's courage and your determination, Sally wrote, my daughter's death finally has meaning. Andrea can never hurt another child, and other families won't suffer what we've suffered. Clinton kept the letter in his desk drawer, along with dozens of others from families who'd found closure through Jimmy's case. His son's death had been a tragedy, but Jimmy's final act of courage had saved other children and brought peace to other parents. It wasn't the life Clinton had planned, but it was a purpose worth living for. Every morning, he visited Jimmy's grave before work. Every evening, he told his son about his day. And every night, he went to sleep knowing that justice had been served and evil had been punished.